Greetings to all. Welcome to CEC lecture. The topic for the lecture is International Day of Rural Women. In this lecture, we shall explain the importance of observance of International Day of Rural Women. In this lecture, while talking about the significance of observance of International Day of Rural Women, we shall also discuss the historical aspects concerning International Day of Rural Women, looking at significant UN conferences, deliberations, resolutions that made the way for observance of International Day of Rural Women. To begin with, quoting from the very important words from Antonio Guterres, UN Secretary General, despite ensuring the world can be fed, many rural women suffer from discrimination, systemic racism, structural poverty. We must invest in rural women so that they can access the health care, social protection, and information services they need. The important remarks from UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres on the occasion of International Day of Rural Women 2021. We read the quote from the official Twitter handle of UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres on the occasion of International Day of Rural Women. So, again the very words that despite ensuring the world can be fed, looking at the important dynamics that rural women suffer from discrimination, from structural poverty to many other issues. So when we reflect on International Day of UN Women, it becomes essential to also look at the mandate of United Nations. Let's look at the important historical facts. 1945, United Nations was established with 51 founding member states. Few years later than that, 1995, the idea to celebrate International Day of Rural Women is put forward during the General Assembly in Beijing, China. 2003, few years down the line, the World Summit in Geneva, therein a resolution for working towards the development of information technology for women in rural places is initiated. And in the same line, 2007 International Day of Rural Women, it is dedicated in the UN, it was declared in the UN General Assembly that 15th October will be observed as International Day of Rural Women. With this, it becomes important also to reflect at the historical aspects. That is, the United Nations General Assembly established this day on 18 December 2007. This day was observed for the first time in 2008. While we talk about International Day for Rural Women, it is very important to understand that the idea guiding International Day for Rural Women was brought up at the 4th World Conference on Women in China in 1995. Now, again, it is very important that the suggested date, October 15th, as it was the eve of the World Food Day. So, it was celebrated as World Rural Women's Day until 2007. When the UN General Assembly established the International Day of Rural Women. The first observance when we talk about International Day of Rural Women was celebrated, that is 15th October 2008. Now, it is very important to understand that International Day for Rural Women is celebrated every year as a way to recognize the important role and contribution of rural women. Now, we just mentioned about that how the idea for the International Day of Rural Women was brought up at the 4th World Conference on Women that was in China 1995. With this, it becomes essential to reflect on the important deliberations also that were there at the 4th World Conference on Women in Beijing, China. Now, when we talk about this Women's World Conference, the 4th Women World Conference on Women, that is, it is one of the important 4 conferences on the issue of women when we look at the time period 1975 to 1995. It was built on political agreements, and the political agreements that were there, again, as we know, that we're looking at a time period 1975 to 1995. So the political agreements from the 3 previous global conferences on women were somewhere strengthened by the deliberations of the 4th World Conference on Women in Beijing. And this also, along with this important idea of taking women's movement forward, it consolidated 5 decades of legal advances that were aimed with respect to the bigger aspect of securing equality of women with men in law and in practice. Now, with this, it also becomes important to reflect as the 4th World Conference on Women in China, Beijing. It was this World Conference wherein the idea for the International Day of Rural Women came up. So therein it also becomes important to look at the scope of this conference, because that tells us that how significant issues were deliberated therein, and within that, the very idea of reaching out to concerns of rural women was significantly also thought over. So when we talk about the scope of the 4th World Conference on Women in Beijing, China, taking inputs from that we got from UN Women and UN.org, that is more than 17,000 participants attended the conference, 6,000 government delegates, 4,000 NGO representatives, somewhere 4,000 and more media representatives, and a parallel NGO forum that was held in the place near Beijing, which also drew somewhere about 30,000 participants. So with this, that is this occasion, the 4th Women World Conference in Beijing was very significant for global agenda with respect to gender equality. And then this conference is also considered as the key global policy document with respect to issue of gender equality. Today, whenever one tries to deliberate on issues, norms, values concerning gender equality, no doubt, the 4th World Conference on Women in Beijing, China is a very important milestone. Now, therein, there were strategic objectives, the actions for the advancement of women and the advancement of the bigger goal of gender equality. And herein, with respect to strategic objectives and of looking at women and gender equality, 12 critical areas of concern were highlighted. Let us read through them one by one, and then we come to the bigger aspect that we are discussing, the historical aspects concerning International Day of Rural Women. Poverty, women and poverty, education and training of women, women and health, violence against women, women and armed conflict, women and the economy, women in power and decision making, institutional mechanism for the advancement of women, human rights of women, women and the media, women and the environment, the girl child. And herein, that is when we try to look at the important 12 areas ranging from women and poverty, education and training of women, women and health, human rights of women, women and the media. The UN Division for Women in the review of the 4th World Conference stated that the fundamental transformation that took place in Beijing was the recognition of the need to shift the focus from women to the concept of gender. Now, that is again quoting from the very important remarks from the UN Division for Women in the review report, that is, recognizing that the entire structure of society and all relations between men and women within it had to be re-evaluated. Quoting further, that this change represented a strong reaffirmation that women's rights were human rights and that gender equality was an issue of universal concern benefiting all. So moving forward once again, that how the International Day of Rural Women, the idea that came forward during the 4th World Conference on Women in Beijing, with this, that is the very significant aspect that the year, with the aspect that International Day of Rural Women, the day being observed globally on 15th October each year. Taking input from the important thought process at the UN Conference for Women in Beijing, China, the International Day of Rural Women recognizes the crucial role of women and girls in ensuring the sustainability of rural households and communities, improving rural livelihoods and overall well-being. It is also very important to understand that in India, the Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers' Welfare observes the very important day, that is Rashtriya Mahila Kisan Divas. Rashtriya Mahila Kisan Divas has been observed by the Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers' Welfare in India since 2016 to increase the active participation of women in agriculture. So therefore, when we reflect on two important aspects, women and agriculture, taking inputs from Food and Agricultural Organization, let us now look at the important role women play with respect to agriculture. So there one finds that when we look at women in agriculture, women play important roles in with respect to cash crops production, with respect to subsistence productions. Women play an important role with respect to small livestock raising. Further, when we look at women in agriculture, women play important role with respect to some of the important aspects of fisheries also. Women cultivate kitchen gardens and subsistence crops, root crops. So again, reading from all the inputs that we got from FAO.org, looking at the important role of women in agriculture. Women play an important role, that is a major part of the labor for planting, weeding, harvesting. It is the women that are important part of this labor workforce. Further, when we look at post-harvesting tasks like threshing, processing, marketing, even in these post-harvest tasks, women play an important role. Once again, taking inputs from the resources that we read from FAO.org with respect to women in agriculture. That is, women play important role with respect to spraying chemicals, fertilizers, mechanized tasks, amongst others. Further, when we look at women in agriculture, they are also responsible then for household tasks, agroforestry production, amongst others. Further, they play an important role in decision making. We all know that with respect to seed selection, harvesting, threshing, storage, processing, utilization of the harvest, these are all important decisions wherein at the household level, women do play an important role. Further, taking important inputs from the data that we read at FAO.org, that is, women make up 43% of the global agriculture labor force, and therein there are issues and one cannot ignore them. Discrimination when it comes to land, discrimination when it comes to livestock ownership, discrimination when it comes to issues of equal pay, issues concerning participation in the decision making entities and access to credit and financial services. So the International Day of Rural Women, observed each year on 15th October, was established by the UN General Assembly, and the resolution was 62/136, that's on 18 December 2007. So therefore what we see here is that is there is a need to situate concerns of women, especially the rural women, when we look at the agrarian system. For example, there are food systems from production to processing, preparation, consumption, distribution of food, securing household and community nutrition. In all these, it is very important to understand the concerns of the women. Then when we look at the agrarian setup, especially when we try to factor in the rural women, unequal power relations too are a cause of concern. Then further, the very issue of how unequal power relations then impact the output, that is disproportionate share of unpaid care and effort, then unequal access to food, and most important, discriminatory gender norms and practices, which from issues of malnutrition to food insecurity to violence are a cause of concern. When we look at some of the important data also, that is, this data will tell us that there is a need to be sensitized further. There is a need to increase solidarity with respect to concerns of the rural women. Pointing out important inputs from the UN Women's latest report. Once again, we read that at unwomen.org. That is, beyond COVID-19, a feminist plan for the sustainability and social justice. That is, this report calls out, it makes a very important call. It echoes the call for rebuilding broken global food system from the bottom up. This report, the UN Women's latest report, it supports diverse and healthy food crop production for local, national, regional markets, which is very critical, if we go by this report, very critical for supporting rural women's livelihoods and ensuring food security for all. Further, once again, quoting from the report, that is, when we look at the COVID-19 pandemic, approximately 2.37 billion people, once again, these are official figures from the UN reports, did not have access to adequate food in 2020. And an increase of almost 20%, that is 320 million people in just 1 year. So therefore, rural women and girls too were disproportionately impacted by the food security. So therefore, then the bigger message the International Day of Rural Women carries, that is looking at the concerns and issues of the rural women, again then becomes very significant. Further, let's look at the important aspect, that is the United Nations Secretary General's report, Our Common Agenda. Quoting from the report, transforming our food systems so that all people have access to healthy diets that contribute to the restoration of nature, address climate change, and are adapted to local circumstances. Once again, we are quoting from United Nations Secretary General's Our Common Agenda report. Further, quoting from the report, by ensuring that rural women and girls participate in and benefit from the transformation, we can help deliver the sustainable development goals. And herein, once again, there are two important goals, that is zero hunger, this is goal 2, and gender equality, this is goal 5. So therefore, when we look at the United Nations Secretary General's Our Common Agenda, the important point that is coming forward, that that is biggest shared test, that is, it's going to be our biggest shared test since the Second World War. Humanity faces a stark and urgent choice. Further, that is humanity's welfare, that is humanity's very future depend on solidarity and working together as a global family to achieve global goals for people, for the planet, for prosperity and for peace. So therefore, once again, quoting from the United Nations Secretary General's Our Common Agenda report, that is, these challenges can only be addressed by an equally increased interconnected. I repeat, these challenges can only be addressed by an equally interconnected response through reinvigorated multilateralism and the United Nations at the center of our efforts. Member states asked me to report back with recommendations to our common agenda. So again, the need for understanding the need for solidarity, and above all, the report also saying that the choices we make or fail to make today could result in further breakdown or a breakthrough to a greener, better, safer future. The choice is ours. Once again, quoting from the United Nations Secretary General's Our Common Agenda, that is, the choice is ours to make, but we will not have this chance again. So therefore, when we reflect on International Day of Rural Women, it is very important to understand that the day tries to factor in gender equality. It tries to increase solidarity, increase support, amplify support with respect to empowering the women in the rural areas and looking at the significant contribution of the rural women with respect to agriculture, with respect to rural development. So therefore, in the light of the important summary from United Nations Secretary General's report, Our Common Agenda, that is, the choice is ours to make, but we will not have the chance again. Once again, there is a need to amplify support with respect to concerns of the agrarian women, concerns of rural women with respect to agriculture and rural development. There have been several reports, for example, United Nations latest report that we discussed, Beyond COVID-19, a feminist plan for sustainability and social justice. How today it is very important to support diverse and healthy food crop production, and how it is an important need to understand the echo of this report for rebuilding the global broken food system from the bottom up. So therein, once again, the concerns that International Day of Rural Women raises becomes important. So therefore, International Day of Rural Women, which is observed every year on 14th October, established by UN General Assembly resolution in 2007, it becomes essential to look at the important interface of women with respect to agriculture and rural development, from food system to unequal power relations, disproportionate share of paid and unpaid labor, and above all, when women make a significant part of the global agricultural labor force. So one has to look at the issues concerning participation of women in decision making, and especially issues concerning participation of rural women with respect to land ownership, with respect to livestock ownership, with respect to financial services. Women, when we look at agriculture, they have really played an important role. From storage, processing, harvesting, rural women are involved in various stages of agriculture. But there is a need also to look at the specific concerns, to look at active participation of the rural women in agriculture. So therefore, it is very important that the International Day of Rural Women, observed globally on 15th October, it recognizes the crucial role of women with respect to looking at the important dynamics of agriculture, issues of rural development, and therefore we must try to understand that there is a need for getting solidarity, there is a need to amplify all efforts with respect to issues concerning the rural women. As discussed, that the first call with respect to the observance of International Day of Rural Women, it was brought up at the 4th World Conference on Women, that was in China, 1995. And from therein, it was suggested that 15th October as will be the day, and from therein comes the idea that the first observance was there on 15th October 2008, and now International Day of Rural Women is celebrated every year as a very important observance to recognize the critical role and contribution of rural women. The idea coming from the fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing, that is, there is a need to look at the important aspects, that how this conference put forward an important agenda for global gender equality. That is, it is considered as a key global policy document on gender equality. International Day of Rural Women coming from this conference is indeed very significant. Therefore, in light of the historical aspects as well as in light of the present challenges and in light of the need for holistic future development, the message of the International Day of Rural Women becomes indeed very significant. Dear learners, we hope that the lecture presented to you significant inputs and insights. We look forward to positive, encouraging feedback from you all. Thank you very much.